Now, in addition, we have this drift towards self-managed teams. There are some advantages of self-managed teams, and usually the teams are somewhat cross-functional. They certainly staff with sufficient expertise, and one of the major features of self-managed teams is that they can coordinate the efforts among themselves without resorting to formal methods of doing that, and by project plans and paper communication or its equivalent. So self-managed teams are much more productive than if you want separated teams or disjointed teams. And one of the bargains with a self-managed team is that you will allow a self-managed team a great deal of flexibility and a great deal of responsibility. They are best to decide what to do in the circumstances, and that's great. However, it comes with some problems. The team has to balance various of the company objectives, the organizational objectives. Now, in software development, and probably pretty much any other endeavor, you have three main objectives that you're trying to balance. One is that the organization must always pursue any method of reducing costs that it can. Essentially, you have to do that, or you become uncompetitive and you go out of business. An organization must also pursue any increase in productivity it can. All right? Now that includes automation and things like that. But the other one that tends to get lost in the battle is that the organization must maintain the quality and functionality. It must present a viable proposition. So the quality and scope of its products have to be balanced against productivity and cost performance. So these are the bargains we have to do, and teams are not necessarily fully aware of all of those, the three of them, okay? And there tends to be a great concentration on the first two. Teams also may not be well equipped, have all the knowledge to know how to adapt their work practices to meet the competing priorities. Now, this is a fairly significant problem, particularly if you're dealing with a process-based approach. Now, in a dynamic environment such as agile software development, now I have worked in the software process area for quite some time. I was involved in drafting standards on the whole thing, and also assessing them. So I'm pretty familiar with the whole process-based approach. And I've watched various attempts to describe how you actually tailor the processes to suit the circumstances. And I've watched essentially how those the frustration of those who wrote the processes in the first place, saying, but of course you should tailor them to the circumstances, and it's easy. This is what you do. The problem is that they know, but they're expert. They're very familiar with the totality of the process itself, and they know what has to be balanced against other things. The problem is that in implementation in any one organization, the whole process becomes fragmented across the organization and even outside the organization. It's very difficult for any one person to be fully aware of the consequences of changing any one part of the process. And so you tend to get this drift toward rigidity of the process simply because it works, and you don't know if you're going to change one piece that you're going to break it. So that's one of the problems. The second problem is that not everybody understands the process that well, and not everybody understands processes enough to be able to say how you should tailor them. So we have a problem. We need to shift the processes. We need to adapt to the circumstances. But the whole process approach tends to result in this very big and rigid type approach, particularly for software development. Now, a different approach is to acknowledge that your self-managed teams do know their stuff. They are expected to have a certain amount of expertise. And what the self-managed team needs are means that help them decide what needs to be done in which circumstances. All right? Our principles can provide that, and it's far easier to deal with a collection of well-understood principles than it is to try and deal with the specific instructions on how you alter this big, humongous process-based approach.